The Toronto Scepters off to a slow start, but can they turn the tide once again? All that and so much more on the Women's Hockey Report.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, women's hockey fans. Welcome once again to the Women's Hockey Report, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team, or in this case, your favorite league kind of genre of sports, Rachel. And we come to you once a week. I want to let you know that today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by FanDuel. You can keep the season going with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Let's first do a vibe check, Rachel. We have another week of PWHL action. Obviously, both of us also NHL hosts. But what's good in your worlds right now before we get into the nit and the grit of the PWHL?
Well, I am excited because I will be attending my first PWHL game of the season coming up this Sunday between the New York Sirens and Minnesota Frost, the top two teams in the league, and I am pumped. It's going to be freezing cold outside, but we're going to make it, and it's going to be great.
Oh, fantastic. And new venue. I got to see PWHL New York at the time out at UBS Arena a handful of times, but I haven't seen women's hockey at Prudential Center since the Riveters won the 2018 Isabel Cup. So I cannot wait to hear all about that game. And as you said, the top two teams going head to head. On today's episode, just want to give you a rundown real quick, everybody. We are actually going to go to the other side of the standings. We're going to talk about, is there trouble in Toronto, and maybe sprinkle in a little conversation about Ottawa as well. Then we're going to talk about the PWHL Takeover Tour, which is heading, among other places, to Seattle. So as the Locked On Kraken host, of course, I'm pretty excited about that one. And then we will wrap up with talking about a recap of the most recent international tournaments. But Rachel, trouble in Toronto. 1-4 to start the season, just 3 points in the standings. What's your biggest takeaway? Still early, but is this as bad of a start as it looks like for the Scepters?
I think it's an interesting bad start just because they have so much talent there. Most of their roster are returning players, not a lot of new faces to integrate. So you would think that they would have seamlessly kind of transitioned from their momentum at the end of last season into this season and been a lot more effective up front. But that just has not come to fruition.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you kind of posed this question that I think is definitely worth asking, 4 games in, 4 or 5 games in for Toronto. And, how much are they missing Natalie Spooner? Because in the cold open, I alluded to the fact that Toronto has been down this road before. That being said, they also went on a hot streak, and that coincided with Natalie Spooner really getting hot and ultimately becoming the scoring champion for the PWHL. So how much do you think, they are missing Spooner?
I mean, I think it's a big deal. She had 20 goals last season, which is pretty significant in the grand scheme of things. And then Natalie Spooner has been a leader in this game for years, and she's a glue player, right? And when you're missing a glue player like that, I know there are other excellent hockey players on this team. Like, there's no arguing that. But Natalie Spooner is one of those players that helps bring a team together and motivate them moving forward. And her absence, I think, kind of speaks volumes in terms of how the rest of the team can show themselves out there.
I'm inclined to agree. And I also think that Spooner's disposition overall is just bright, bubbly, positive. She seems to have that effect. That being said, while I agree with you, I think also we have to kind of look at what's going on the defensive side of things, maybe even goaltending. I know that was something that you and I, you in particular, were thinking of talking about with goaltending, but it's still pretty early on in the season. Yeah. That being said, Toronto is giving up the most goals against, or second most, I should say, because Ottawa, but 14 goals against. They're not particularly great on the penalty kill. So quick assessment tells me that maybe there are some things defensively that are lacking from this Toronto team.
Yeah, and I think communication is a big, big part of the problem here. And I believe it was Sarah Nurse who was interviewed between periods during the game this week. And she talked specifically about that and how the team was kind of being instructed to play from jump, right? You have to be ready to go at puck drop and have the communication out there to manage the puck effectively. And they're not doing that. It is very clear. And that's, I think, part of what's going on defensively there is they're just kind of discombobulated.
Oh, man. As you were talking, I'm just like, oh, this sounds like an episode of Locked On Kraken, but I digress. I'm like, oh, gosh, I know what that sounds like. I know what that feels like. But also, I mean, what Sarah has said, we've heard from Troy Ryan, and an interesting exchange when, especially after that New York game between Troy Ryan and Emma Malte that we want to play here for you. But this is post game after that loss to the Sirens, who you will be getting to see soon. And you just get the sense that there's some things that Toronto, it just isn't reaching. I should say Toronto isn't reaching their full potential. I think that's at least part of the issue here. It's not necessarily that they feel, as we will hear from Troy Ryan, that they're necessarily being outworked. But here's the clip from, again, after the loss to New York.
I think we have to try to reevaluate where we're at right now as a group. I would find it hard to find anybody that's pleased or happy with our play as a group right now. Just need to be better. It obviously is early in the season, but I know last year we were able to turn it around, but I don't think you can rest on that kind of run happening again. The league's tighter, the league's more difficult to play against. We just got to be better. I think it's, I think the talent is there. There's enough skill in our group. I think we're lacking a bit of mentality right now to play the game the right way. I think sometimes those comebacks are a little bit jaded because, if you look at New York, they probably start to play their whole bench and just kind of roll their line. So, they're in a 4-goal lead, so they don't have to grind it out. We make a goalie change. Sometimes that jolts a little bit of, I know our players would want Kirk to have a good first PWHL experience, so I think they give a little extra effort to help her out. But I think the play itself, obviously nice to score a couple goals, but it's probably just a result of New York sitting back and just playing the depth of their lineup. So take advantage of that with her shortening up a bit. Tough one to come back from that.
I'm not sure if I can continue. It's a different season, it's a different team, right? I think that last year, I think that although we were losing in the beginning, we were playing the right way. I think this is a different kind of battle where we just need to figure out how to play 60 minutes of hockey the right way.
So, I mean, Rachel, a lot going on in that clip. I do think that Ryan is holding his players to account. I think Emma Malte alludes to that as well. Also, is it light shade to both his own team and to New York that Troy Ryan threw out there?
Yeah, to put an asterisk on another team's play is just weird, right?
Wow.
They have some sort of unseen advantage that Toronto doesn't have, which is blatantly false.
Right. It's how dare they have depth? What? That was so strange. As you can
Emma
see,
Malte, though, oh my God, that reaction.
Yeah, I know that reaction. She's like, I'm not touching that. I'm not touching it. So yeah, is there trouble in Toronto? I think the answer is yes, and you alluded to this at the top of the segment. There's definitely something that needs to be fixed. It sounds like it's mostly a mentality, and this season is relatively young, and it's just a matter of when and who on that team is going to take over leadership, because this seems again like a mentality thing more than a skill thing, so more effort even, which are things you can fix. Just quickly though, Rachel, we alluded to this on the last episode, a little bit of that international break. We're going to talk about what that looked like for some players. But I mean, Boston looking good. But the conversation with Boston this week was, are they playing too physical? Now, a part of me is like, okay, this is a conversation rolling over for people just not understanding women's hockey. And is it something that could become an issue down the road?
I mean, I think so. I don't necessarily think that, Ottawa was complaining about it in any significant way, right?
No.
In terms of the physicality. It's just that Ottawa got called for no penalties in that
Right.
game and Boston did. Like
Right.
that's literally it. So if you
Yeah.
think a weird line in the sand between what's a penalty and what's not, that's a conversation to be had behind the scenes with officiating, but
Yep.
not really to be aired in public, in my opinion, at this
Yeah.
point,
Yeah,
right?
it was 3 penalties. I mean, that's far from, as Courtney Kessel, the head coach of Boston, said, egregious. I mean, if you have an NHL team that has 3 penalties, I think you're thinking that they're doing all right. Comparative to no penalties, I mean, then we
Right.
can get
And they
into
won the
all
game.
right.
Let's
Yeah,
also be clear.
right.
Boston
Also,
won the game.
I mean, this is like treading into WNBA finals territory for me, right? Like the conversation between the Minnesota Lynx and the New York Liberty, and who calls out the bad officiating, and does that help them moving forward? Like, again, I don't think it's an issue right now, something to keep in mind, but we did see hear Courtney Kessel say, again, I honestly don't think they've been egregious penalties. I think the refs are trying to figure it out. There's a few new ones in the league, and hopefully it gets figured out. But I'm not mad at anyone that took penalties tonight. So non-issue. New York over Toronto, we talked about that. 2 for 4 on the power play for the Sirens. Again, they're a top team in the league. They have depth, which, shocker, Troy Ryan. Yes, New York has depth and they will use it. Now, whether your team or the Toronto Scepters can score in frames 1 and 2, I mean, that kind of seems like a Toronto issue, but we talked about that. Minnesota, as we alluded to, top team in the league. They're looking pretty good. I think it's interesting what's happening in Ottawa, including that I did not realize that the one and only Cheyenne Darkangelo just recently got her first career PWHL goal. To me, that sounds wild. I can't even believe
No goals last season.
that's
It
wild.
was crazy. Absolutely crazy.
For those who may not know, I mean, this is a player that won with the Toronto Six in the PHF, repping the PHF today. Just a fantastic player, has always been a hard nose forward, right? Power forward. And the fact that Shy Dark, as she's sometimes known, hadn't found the back of the net, a little bit strange. And it was like a pop off her shin. It was kind of weird. But again, in hockey, they don't ask, how, they ask how many. Now, in the case of Ottawa, it didn't come in a win. So how many is still a valid question in that game. But, I think it seems like, Rachel, they're trying to feel some things out.
Yeah, Ottawa has some tremendous stretches of play so far, like where they seem like they're completely dominating a game, and then it just goes away.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing with this team, and their rookie Danielle Serdachny has been playing phenomenally so far, in my opinion, and is a really big standout on that team. She was their top draft pick this year. She's got a goal and 3 assists so far, but as a team, they have not been able to put it together for complete games as of yet.
Yeah, something definitely to keep an eye on, and we will let you know who Ottawa and everyone else in the PWHL has coming up this week. But first, again, we're going to talk about the PWHL Takeover, and we'll get to that in the second stanza.
Today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you love sports, you're going to love Prize Picks. It's the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your other favorite sports, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in on the action. And here's why you need to get started today. You can win up to 200 times your money on Prize Picks, and you can also get $50 instantly when you play that first $5 lineup. There's no need to win. The $50 is guaranteed. Also, Prize Picks offers fun weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday, where select player projections are discounted up to 25%. So download the app today, use the code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. Prize Picks, run your game.
Thanks as always for making Locked On NHL and specifically the Women's Hockey Report a part of your daily rundown. Erica L Ayala alongside Rachel Donner, and we are here to give you all things WOHO or women's hockey. And that includes the PWHL Takeover Tour. Now, we have seen Rachel, whether it's national teams on the women's side, the college game to some extent, but definitely women's pro hockey over the years do neutral site games. But this seems to me, Rachel, like the most comprehensive list of takeover stops in one single season.
Is it though? I think, listen, there is one major city missing from the list. And I agree with you. Like on its surface, we do have 9 different locations represented here, including Buffalo, which is, a former NWHL PHF market. Important to include them here.
Long live the Buttes.
Yep, absolutely. Seattle is absolutely important. Huge potential market there. The city that's missing from this list for me is Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
It is a market that has been explored extensively. The PWHPA has had multiple showcases in Pittsburgh at the Pittsburgh Penguins practice rink, a tremendous facility that I've attended that showcase there in Pittsburgh before myself, and it was a really great event. And I think, as a city that's been in the women's pro hockey expansion conversation for many years, to not have it on this list, it's either like, okay, Pittsburgh, you already passed the grade, we don't need to test you anymore, or you're off the list. And I don't know which it is.
Yeah, that's interesting. So just to run through the cities really quickly, we've got Seattle, Vancouver, Denver, Quebec City, Edmonton, as you mentioned, Buffalo, Raleigh, North Carolina, raise up, Detroit, and St. Louis. Now, here's the only thing I can think of. And as you said, the majority of these are big arenas where we see the NHL playing. Could it be possible that Pittsburgh or any other city where maybe we think could be a women's hockey game, is that they couldn't secure the larger arenas?
I mean, it's possible that just scheduling came into play for this year. I think that's, something that is definitely possible. It's just like we haven't really heard either way, of like other potential cities that were in consideration and just didn't make the cut for whatever reason. Especially because this list is a potential expansion city, kind of list, right?
Yep. We talked about it when we were doing our spotlight bi-weekly with Gil Martin, but there is a call for RFPs, right? So a call for an inquiries. How can I not speak today? There's a call for people who are interested in the PWHL to send in those RFPs and to kind of submit proposals, right? And I think even starting in Seattle just seems huge to me. I know that I have reported through Locked On Kraken before the league and on the Women's Hockey Spotlight that before the league officially started, because they started January 1, which of course was when Seattle hosted the Winter Classic. And there was conversation even about what an activation could look like in Seattle. But it just turned out that the league wanted to focus, and I think rightfully so, on kind of their launch and not have the first thing that they do in a new league be kind of coupled with something else. I think that makes a lot of sense. And the reason I think Seattle is high on the list, if there is a short list, and this maybe is a part of it, is because Rachel, when the rivalry series went to Climate Pledge Arena, that to date is the largest crowd to attend one of those international friendlies between the US and Canada in all of the history of women's hockey.
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge factor there, right? In terms of, potential expansion. They want to know that there's a fan base that's going to buy the tickets.
Right.
And it's extremely important. And obviously there's some geographic considerations with expansion and travel costs and all of that, like, is, kind of understood in the conversation. But ultimately, like, you can afford to pay the travel costs if you're going to sell the tickets, right?
Yeah, which is an interesting conversation because, we heard a lot about history being made and attendance, rightfully so, a huge part of the narrative for the PWHL last season in their inaugural season. I don't think all of those numbers have been maximized. Still early in the season, but just early. I think that the I guess what I'm saying is I don't know that we know what the average attendance is truly going to be for the PWHL as we're early into season number 2. But again, at Climate Pledge Arena, 14,551 on November 2022. And you know what? The players are excited, including one player, Olympian, who is going to be able to play close to home for the first time since high school. This is a multiple time Olympian in Nicola Hensley. But let's hear what players have to say about the PWHL Takeover Tour.
I think, any opportunity to have an outreach or currently out of market game for us is a critical one for the growth of the game and also our league. And to be able to play in Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle area, I mean, we're super excited. I have the privilege, as you said, to play during the rivalry series, and that was a spectacular crowd. So really looking forward to another crowd in a true sports city, and you're going to get a phenomenal game. So excited to get out there and excited for puck drop.
Definitely had the Vancouver game circled since I heard about it. It's been pretty exciting for a lot of friends and family back home, but I think more importantly just for the entire female game and the growth that we've seen with hockey, having all the PWHL teams out east, but now all the girls out west being able to watch these games in Seattle, Vancouver, Denver. It's going to be an incredible opportunity, and I'm just really grateful that we get to play in those games as well, but more excited to continue to grow the game and have great competition out west too.
I'm super excited to, go out to Colorado and play. The last time I played in Colorado was in high school, so definitely excited to get back there and continue to grow the game.
Yeah, so I mean, this is huge for the athletes themselves. I think testing the waters, this is kind of like a low fidelity, right? Lo-fi way to see about, again, viewership, more so attendance, what is the real interest and who are the interested parties. I think as we see the landscape for women's sports changing, I think what the PWHL is trying to do, Rachel, and I think it's smart, but also I think it has to be done smartly, is they're trying to ride the wave. Women's hockey has always felt just a little bit outside of the overall women's sports bubble. They're a little bit behind the 8 ball in some ways. And I think that this is a unique way to try and get women's hockey again as a part of the larger conversation.
Yeah, I think so. It's it says a lot when you put these games in the bigger arenas, right? Yep. And you look at, the WNBA plays in NBA arenas in the same buildings, and you just sort of need that in order to have the cachet here. And I think that women's hockey is a little bit behind on this front. And so that's where this takeover tour is just so vitally important to the future of the league in terms of establishing neutral city fan bases.
Yep.
And bringing teams into town, so then there's motivation to become fans of those teams, but then also just being like, okay, like, can we do this here?
Yeah, exactly. So excited to see how the PWHL Takeover Tour goes down. And I will be at the first game, of course, at Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle on January 5th. And then the tour culminates on Saturday, March 29th at the Enterprise Center in St. Louis, Missouri. So that'll be exciting. And we will keep you posted as we make our way through the tour. Coming up next, what's the international flair and flavor for the PWHL? And let's talk about some of the players that are just returning from, and coaches actually, returning from international duty, coming up on today's episode. And the Women's Hockey Report is, of course, brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Now get ready to tackle the NFL action all season long with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the very same app where you place your bets. So visit FanDuel.com to join today. Now, we also, of course, have NHL odds up there, WNBA when we are in WNBA season. And so, again, for new customers, whether your sport is the NFL or otherwise, you can get started today with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and, of course, us here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks, as always, for making us a part of your daily destination. Again, Rachel Donner, one of your co-hosts of Locked On Flyers, alongside me, Erica L Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken, and we're talking all of the women's sports. I personally love talking the international game, and I love that we're seeing the PWHL lean into the international flair and flavor a little bit more. That was definitely a concern of mine. We haven't always seen North American leagues really tout how much international talent they have, but I think that's changing. There's a landscape that's changing in women's hockey, and the PWHL seems to be riding that wave. So, Rachel, last week we talked about the Six Nations tournament, and there was also a Four Nations tournament. So we have some players that were able to, of course, be represented there, particularly in the Four Nations that are in the PWHL. But let's give a recap of Six Nations as well, where we saw some of maybe future PWHL players playing.
Right. So that's more like a European tournament that the US and Canada got nicely invited to for one leg of it to make it a Six Nations mini tournament. But that being said, Team USA wins that tournament overall. And the standout player, 100% Abbey Murphy, who plays for the University of Minnesota. She had the game-winning goal against Canada. Plus, she had an assist in that game. She was player of the game in that game, as well as the first preliminary game in that tournament too, where she had 2 goals and 1 assist in that game. So in 4 games total, 5 goals, 4 assists. This girl can score. I mean, she's already got 32 points in 18 games for Minnesota this season. Like, absolutely on a tear.
Absolutely, for sure. Again, definitely a player that some PWHL teams are going to look to. And it'll be curious to see if we see that kind of interesting snake style draft. Also, what is it? The gold rule or something like that for the draft. So very curious. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But, also Emma Soderberg backstopped Sweden and was able to play for her home country or her home nation in that tournament. You also have Carla McLeod, who is the head coach of the Ottawa team. She had just gotten back in the nick of time to be the bench boss for Ottawa's most recent game after getting back from Finland, where she coached Team Czechia. You also have the four nations. Now, this is interesting because you had Hungary, Japan, and France as the three teams that two teams, I think, Japan and France in particular. Very interesting to see them continue to jockey for that top tier in international play. And Chloe Arard from the New York Sirens, she scored 2 goals, including an OT winner over Japan to help France win that Four Nations tournament. They went 3-0. And then also Sirens defender Taylor Baker. I've gotten to speak to her about growing the game for Team Hungary. We had a few PHF players that were able to represent Hungary. And so always exciting. I love just being able to talk about those players. I love also hearing them pronounce their names as they would like to hear them. So that is definitely something I'm going to bring to the Women's Hockey Report as we move on. But we also know that, again, players like Baker, Arard, Soderberg, and so many more are now back with the PWHL. So, Rachel, what is on tap, including the game that you are going to on Sunday?
Yeah, so that game is on Sunday. The New York Sirens hosting the Minnesota Frost. I cannot express to you how excited I am to see this game.
I'm excited for you
because the hockey is going to be so good. That is a noon game, and then the day before, though, today at 2 p.m., Montreal, who did not have a game this week prior to Saturday for us to discuss. No games on the schedule until then. Will be facing Toronto, who, as we talked about earlier in the show, really need to spark something here. And Montreal's been playing pretty solidly so far. And I don't think they're going to be very formidable competition, I think, for Toronto trying to get back on the horse, so to speak. But so it'll be a really fun weekend of PWHL hockey to watch. And I'm looking forward to it.
And of course, we will recap it all next week for you ahead of the Saturday games. But as always, we want to thank you for making Locked On NHL and now our Women's Hockey Report a part of your listening, your viewing. Make sure you subscribe, commenting on the different videos that we put up for women's hockey is huge for engagement, and we want to continue to grow this. And I've already seen comments on social media, Rachel, that not if, but when we go to a daily show for the Women's Hockey Report, we're going to have a bunch of everydayers. So I'm looking forward to that. But make sure that you check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So for Rachel Donner, I'm Erica L Ayala, and this, of course, has been the Women's Hockey Report. Enjoy the games, and you enjoy the game at Prudential Center. So jealous. Can't wait to hear about it for next week. And we will catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.